In the movie Gladiator, the villain, the Emperor Commodus, walks down into the arena to fight, and it feels like the most made-up thing in the film. An emperor, personally, fighting in the Colosseum? Come on. Except, that's the true part. He really did that. Hundreds of times. And here's what the movie couldn't show you. The real Commodus once decapitated an ostrich in that arena, walked over to where the senators of Rome were sitting, and held up the bloody severed head in one hand and his sword in the other, grinning at them, just showing them. The message being, this could be you. And the senators had to chew leaves to physically stop themselves from laughing, because laughing at the emperor would get you killed. That happened. We have it from a man who was in the room. And it's not even the craziest thing he did. Because the real Commodus was so much more unhinged than the film that they had to tone him down to make him believable. The movie is the sane version. Let me show you the real one. The real history behind the stories you love. Start with his father, because the movie nails this. Marcus Aurelius was one of the great emperors, the last of Rome's 5 good emperors. A run of about 80 years that was the absolute peak of the empire. And he wasn't just a capable ruler. He was a philosopher, a stoic. He wrote a private journal, never meant to be published, that we now call the Meditations. And people still read it today, 1800 years later, for how to handle anger, loss, power, and death. A genuinely wise, disciplined, decent man, running the most powerful state on earth. And running it well. And here's the tragedy the whole thing is built on, and it's real. He spent his final years far from Rome, freezing on the northern frontier, fighting long, grinding wars against the Germanic tribes to hold the border. He didn't die smothered by his son, like the movie says. He most likely died of illness, possibly plague, in a military camp near the front. Worn out, in the field, doing his duty to the last. And he left the whole thing to Commodus. Now, the movie invents a big piece here, so let me be straight about it. In the film, Marcus is about to skip Commodus and hand Rome to the general Maximus to restore the Republic, and Commodus murders him to stop it. That's fiction. Maximus isn't a real person. And the real Marcus actually named Commodus his heir deliberately, made him co-emperor years early, groomed him for it, took him to the front, which honestly is darker than the movie, because it means this brilliant, perceptive man looked at his son, almost certainly saw exactly who he was, and handed him the world anyway. Maybe out of love, maybe out of duty to the bloodline. Maybe he just prayed the kid would rise to it once the weight was on him. He did not rise to it. Commodus took his father's hard-won empire, looked at the brutal frontier wars Marcus had been bleeding to win, and basically went, no thanks. He cut quick deals with the tribes to end the fighting, and went home to Rome to enjoy himself. And enjoy himself is the whole story of his reign. Because Commodus did not want to govern. The paperwork, the provinces, the borders, the endless administration. He handed all of it off to favorites and let them run the show. What he wanted was to be adored. And then, something happened early on that broke him. And this part is real, and it explains everything that comes after. There was a plot to kill him, and it came from inside his own family. His sister, Lucilla, was involved in a conspiracy to assassinate him. And the way it went down mattered. The assassin got close, pulled a dagger, and instead of just striking, he announced it. The Senate sends you this. And then he tried to stab. He fumbled it. Commodus's guards grabbed him, and Commodus survived. But something in him didn't. Because now the young emperor had heard out loud that the Senate wanted him dead. And he never let it go. From that point on, Commodus was paranoid and he was vengeful, and he turned that paranoia on the Roman elite. He started executing senators, wealthy, prominent men, killed on suspicion, on rumor, on a whim, partly out of fear, and conveniently, partly because a dead rich senator's fortune went straight to the emperor, who always needed money for his spectacles. Fear and greed, feeding each other. The reign of the charming prince curdled into something murderous. And while Commodus was busy being paranoid and playing at the arena, who was actually running Rome? For a stretch, a man named Cleander. And Cleander is one of those real historical figures that sounds invented. He'd started as a slave. He rose to become the most powerful man in the palace after the emperor himself. And he used that power to run the most nakedly corrupt operation imaginable. He sold everything. Public offices, governorships, army commands, all for cash. He famously sold so many Senate seats in a single year that Rome ended up with a comically bloated number of consuls, the highest office in the state, just handed out to the highest bidders. The dignity of Rome, auctioned off by a former slave, while the emperor waved a sword at ostriches. And it ended the way corruption plus catastrophe usually ends, badly and suddenly. A plague was tearing through Rome. The Antonine Plague, probably smallpox, had been ravaging the empire for years, killing enormous numbers, and it flared again in the capital. On top of the disease came a grain shortage, hungry, sick, dying people in the streets, and a hated official who'd been getting rich off all of it. So the mob turned. A crowd surged toward Commodus demanding Cleander's head, literally. And Commodus, to save his own skin, gave it to them. He had his most powerful minister executed and handed the head to the mob to calm them down. That's how disposable everyone around him was. Okay, now the arena. Because this is the part everyone knows from the movie, and the reality beats it. Commodus didn't fight once at a dramatic climax. He fought constantly, hundreds of times, by the ancient accounts. He'd come down into the arena as a gladiator, and, shocking twist, because who is going to actually kill the emperor? His opponents surrendered, or were handed wooden weapons, or simply understood the assignment. He'd also staged these grand exhibition hunts, personally slaughtering exotic animals shipped in from across the empire. Lions, elephants, a giraffe, a rhino, ostriches, from a safe raised platform, with a bow, while the crowd was strongly encouraged to cheer. And remember that ostrich head from the start of the video? Here's the full story, because it's real, and it comes from a man who was in the room. The historian Cassius Dio was a Roman senator who personally sat through this. He's the one who tells us about Commodus decapitating the ostriches and holding the head up at the senators with that grin. And the detail Dio confesses is the part that kills me. He says he and the other senators were so terrified of laughing, because laughing at the emperor was a death sentence, that they plucked the laurel leaves out of their ceremonial reeds and chewed them, frantically, to keep their faces straight. Picture that, the most powerful men in the Roman world, secretly eating their own hats, so a man in a lion's skin holding a dead bird wouldn't execute them for smiling. And he charged the city for all of it. 1,000,000 sesterces a performance, billed to the treasury. Rome was paying him to watch him win fights nobody was allowed to win. But the arena isn't even the unhinged part. The unhinged part is that Commodus genuinely came to believe he was a god. Specifically, he believed he was Hercules, the demigod, the hero, son of Jupiter, reborn in him. And he committed to it completely. He dressed as Hercules in public, lion skin over his shoulders, club in hand. He had statues of himself as Hercules erected all over Rome, including a colossal one. He had himself declared the son of Jupiter. And then he started renaming things, and this is where you realize he's completely gone. Not a monument or two, everything. He renamed all 12 months of the year after his own names and titles. He renamed the Roman legions after himself. He renamed the Roman fleet, the Senate, even the Roman people, all Commodian. And he renamed the city of Rome itself, the eternal city, the center of the world. He declared it should now be called Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. He was systematically erasing Rome and writing his own name over the top of it. Picture the whole thing at once. The son of the wisest emperor Rome ever produced, wearing a lion skin, calling himself a living god, fighting rigged death matches for cash, executing senators out of paranoia, letting an ex-slave auction off the government, and renaming the entire empire after himself, while a plague empties the streets. If a screenwriter pitched all of that, you'd tell him to cut it in half. Nobody was ever that far gone. He was that far gone. So how does it actually end? Not in the arena, sword in hand, defeated by a hero. The real ending is quieter and grimmer and honestly more fitting. By the end, the people closest to Commodus, his advisors, his own mistress, the head of his guard, had all worked out the same thing. That he was insane. that he was dangerous, and that they were on his personal list of people to be killed. He'd reportedly drawn up names, so they moved first. Plan A was poison, slipped into his food. But Commodus, genuinely strong and fit from all that training, vomited most of it back up. So they went to Plan B. They sent in the one man strong enough and close enough, his own personal wrestling and training partner, an athlete named Narcissus, and had him strangle the emperor to death in his bath. That's how the god emperor really died. Not run through in front of a roaring coliseum. Choked out in his bathtub, naked and alone, by his own workout partner, in a small, quiet conspiracy, because everyone around him had simply, finally, had enough. And the moment he was dead, the Senate he'd terrorized erupted. Not in grief, in joy. They officially condemned his memory, voted to erase his name, tore down his statues, dragged the record of him through the mud, and quietly, gratefully changed the months of the year back to normal. And here's the part that reaches past the movie, the part that actually matters. Commodus is where the golden age ends. Those 80 years of wise, stable, 5 good emperors Rome, they stop with him, full stop. The historian Cassius Dio, the same man who chewed laurel leaves to keep from laughing, wrote the epitaph for it. He said that with Commodus, Rome descended from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust. He watched it happen in real time, and he knew exactly what he was watching. Because it got worse immediately. Commodus left no clear heir and a shattered system, and his murder kicked off chaos, a scramble for the throne so ugly that within a single year, Rome had 5 different emperors, fighting and murdering their way to the top. At one point the throne was literally auctioned off to the richest bidder by the imperial guard. The empire would survive and limp on for centuries more, but the peak, the confidence, the golden age of Marcus Aurelius and his book about how to live well, that died in a bathtub with his son, and Rome never really got it back. So Gladiator, weirdly, is one of the most honest villain portraits Hollywood has ever done, because they barely had to invent him. They made up Maximus. They made up the murder of Marcus. They gave the whole thing a clean, satisfying, heroic shape, a good man to root for and a clear ending. But the villain at the dead center of it, the vain, jealous, delusional emperor fighting in his own arena, terrorizing the Senate, in love with his own image, they pulled him almost straight from the record. And then they made him saner than he really was. Because the truth, the god complex, the renamed world, the hundreds of rigged fights, the ostrich heads, the leaf-chewing senators, the death in the tub, was too much even for a movie. The hero was invented. The monster was real. This has been Real Roots, the real history behind the stories you love. And next time, we're staying in the ancient world, but I'm taking you to a wall at the very edge of it, and the real, freezing, forgotten soldiers who stood there, guarding Rome against everything waiting in the dark.